Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today, we have all three of our hosts for New Cyber Frontier, Tim Montgomery, Dr. Shawn Murray, and myself. Thanks for joining today, guys.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good to see everybody. It's that time of year.
That time of year, and we're looking at a new year. You know, we've been running the series from myself and Tim about our direction and new direction, and we're bringing in Dr. Murray today to also kind of get a rundown on what we can expect for 2024 and a little bit of a wrap up from last year. You know, what did we see? So I'll turn it over to Dr. Murray. You're kind of the new one here in this conversation this year. Let's let you start it up and say, give us a framework for what you're thinking you saw last year and what we're going to see moving into this year.
Yeah, so and we all talk throughout the year and on different things, and we're involved in different areas, and I would consider ourselves, all three of us, movers and shakers, influential in our industry. So we get to talk to a lot of interesting people. And over the last year, I told my wife I don't want to work as hard in 2024 as I did in 2023. And a lot of it had to do with volunteerism. I became the new president for the Information System Security Association, ISSA International Board of Directors. That's a different episode, I think, but provided some opportunities to talk to some individuals globally on what is going on. I've had some trips to Warsaw, Poland, on some initiatives there, and seeing what they're doing in Italy, in Germany. I'm headed back to Europe here next month. And then I've solidified relationships with legislative directors for congressional leaders, and have had several trips to Washington, D.C., collaborated with some folks here in Colorado. I've got a couple of good friends that work at the Attorney General's office, so we've been talking about legislation there. Legislative issues over the last year have been significant. And one of the biggest challenges, we talk about power, influence, and money. And in Washington, D.C., you can't have that conversation without those three things being part of the conversation. And over the last few years, we're seeing the legislative environment is not changing quickly enough at the federal level, and the states are no longer waiting. In the last year, we've seen significant legislation for privacy in lots of different states, mainly because states are being breached, or their municipalities in some of their cities and their townships are being breached. And so legislative initiatives all of a sudden don't take very long to draft and be voted on and implemented. So one of the unique ones we saw at the end of last year was the state of Illinois to protect privacy information associated with your biometric data, passed the Biometric Data Privacy Act. And so if you are a citizen of that state, you own the privacy information associated with your biometric data. And that could be your voice, your gait analysis on how you walk through an airport or through a store. You own that information. You have to have consent, and you have to provide disclosure if you're going to use any biometric data on a citizen. That's pretty unique. The state of New York enacted some, they're already a state that already has significant privacy and cybersecurity legislation in place, mainly for banking and finance industry. We had a client that literally acquired another company. Literally the day after they legally acquired the company had a ransomware breach. And so working through that, by December 1st, now there's a disclosure requirement for if you pay the ransomware, and they're looking at that as a public disclosure under state law, as a form of I can't the word escapes me, but it's a you've paid an extortion clause, and so an extortion payment. So legislation is a really significant part of what we saw over last year. I had an opportunity to testify on a Senate hearing. It was actually a field Senate hearing with former Governor Hickenlooper, now Colorado State or Colorado federal senator for the state of Colorado. We did a small business Senate hearing on cybersecurity for small business and the lack of resources. So it was a partnership between Gretchen Bliss, myself, a gentleman from NIST, Al Ortiz. We talked about legislation associated with small businesses.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break here from our sponsors. We'll be right back in a minute to get more into what we saw in last year and then moving into, what we look and predict maybe even for 2024. Be right back.
Blockframe technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. We have the three hosts for New Cyber Frontier: Tim Montgomery, Dr. Shawn Murray, and myself, Christopher Gorog, actually Dr. Christopher Gorog now.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Also, something that happened late last year, and you've heard me talking about it a lot in the last
on that one.
last couple weeks, some predictions on that. And Dr. Murray was giving us a rundown of his involvement last year. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to kind of the bump on your thoughts for our discussion here from last year?
Yeah, I think piggybacking on Dr. Murray's consensus about the legislation pieces of this, we're looking at on the federal level, a couple of regulations that's creating more transparency among corporate. The players in corporate are now getting highly scrutinized by different groups, agencies. The Security and Exchange Commission's got a rule out now that they're pending for applying that to the idea behind reporting mechanisms and things where incident response elements playing in. And because that seems to be a bigger player in today's society, they're also getting, penalized for it. So, and then on some of the fronts like TSA and Homeland Security, they've got rulings out now to talk about incident response and the information sharing, which is what Dr. Murray had hinted at different levels. So the federal government is running into a lot of this stuff. And there was an act that was put out by the president that talks about the synergy of an incentive for cybersecurity. So instead of the compliancy measures being incentivized, it's now talking about the continuous monitoring and the posture of security, the resilience of a cybersecurity strategy being incentivized. So we're starting to see the importance play from the rule makers down a lot of incentive to get companies on board with the importance of why cybersecurity becomes a relevant element in everyday organizational management. So even at that scale. So yeah, quite a bit of things turning here. And can't say that I remember last year. This is something that got put into effect last year, but I think it's now here and we're now starting to see it apply much more heavily across the board with corporations at all sizes.
To your point, Tim, some of the things that we also saw last year judiciously is the federal government is now holding not just civilly, but criminally accountable executives for doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you recall, Uber several years ago, they had a cyber breach. It was ransomware. Joe Sullivan was the director of security, the CISO. And, after everything was done, what he ended up doing, his strategy was to turn it into a bug bounty program. So turn the adversary into, a bug bounty, which is supposed to be white hat. And the implications after that was he was indicted and he was convicted last year in May. He got 3 years suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service. SolarWinds, Tim Brown, he has been indicted and he is going to go on trial for his part. And, again, it's not the board of directors and the C-suite can say, well, we don't have a business case for implementing, the recommendations from the CISO. Well, if you're not going to push it, you're going to be held accountable, not just the company civilly, but those who are in charge are going to be criminally liable now.
Yeah, and I think that's one big factor, at least from the CISO standpoint in a C-suite. We just don't see that they take what the chief information security officers really, they don't take it serious. That we don't have to apply the resources. Yada, yada, yada. That seems to be the attitude. And this is really going to put a knee-jerk reaction, a big giant tie in the middle resources if your CEO is getting indicted. So things like that. So it's awful
to go to jail.
It's awful to say that has to happen for people to start understanding how serious this should be. But in other words, it's time. In other words, it's time. It's been there for more than 2 decades. That's going up and down like a roller coaster in our communities across the board. But it's time for certain things to happen, and it's just awful to see that it has to go this strong for people to realize it. So I see that happening this year. More transparency.
More transparency. So, something that, and we've been talking about this lately. Last year was, a big push towards a new classification, zero trust. And that was the buzzword, we'll say, at the beginning of last year. And, now we'll talk about next year, but we're seeing some different buzzwords, we'll say. But the reclassification efforts is what I look at it as. Everybody in cybersecurity said, okay, we have a new way to think about things. How can we position ourselves? And did anything change, or did we just make things more complicated? Which has kind of been the trend over years and years. I see is about every 2 to 3 years, we come up with a new compliance. There's 10,000 line items of things people have to worry about. Now we're blaming the CISOs, the CIOs, or somebody in charge.
Right.
When is the tasking just too complex? We need to get simpler. A way to simplify things is where I think has been come transparent. It's needed.
Yeah, I think the tool set, it's also a big factor. It seems to play a lot of roles. We talked about that in some of the episodes about the suite of tools that security uses. There's an awful lot of companies out there working rigorously, almost against one another at some points. And we could simplify that method, I think, even if it becomes like a roundtable or a community of effort towards simplifying some of these tool sets. I know the landscape that we work in is not simple, and it's forever changing. So how that dynamic works out is certainly would be interesting to try to go down that road to discover if we haven't already started.
To your point on the tools aspect of it as well, I did the DC fly-in with our chamber and some of our government leaders from El Paso County and state legislator, our new mayor. And, there was a tense conversation on Capitol Hill regarding this, what we're talking about now. And one of the county commissioners was very adamant on, the ability to do offensive cyber. If somebody's attacking me, I don't just defend myself. I should be able to attack back. And so, from my perspective of working that at a government level, for the military and intelligence agencies and stuff, that dominantly has been up to the president. It's been relinquished to some other federal agencies. Because if, Tim, it's your company that has a vulnerability, and I'm a threat actor using your resources to pivot as part of the attack, and then offensive cyber comes back and attacks your company, assuming that you're the one who's actually doing the attack, then what are the implications with that? What did we do to Tim's company? And it's kind of like swatting, right? So it really wasn't Tim, it really wasn't his company, but he had a vulnerability that we use as an exploit to do an attack on an organization. So, what do you guys think as far as offensive cyber, being able to attack back?
I'd say there's a place for it. It depends on the ethics behind it, but I certainly believe that not only that, but disclosure of fighting back. It produces the ramifications for the technique. It produces white papers. It produces a lot for even small businesses because they don't have those types of resources. And small businesses seem to be the biggest ones that hackers can get to and use as a resource, like you referred to use it to attack others. So I think that there's certainly a place for it.
I guess I look at it from a social aspect of, at one day back in we'll say the colonial era, everybody was out in the high seas. There was pirates. So they said, how can we fight back? Everybody hired privateers. I think that it doesn't solve the problem. It makes it more convoluted because then we don't know the privateers are the pirates and we can't tell the difference. So, I would say that even though it makes, the person who's getting attacked thinks they have no recourse, and literally they don't, and that's the problem, that the solution isn't to make them become the attacker, because then the next thing is preemptive striking, and next thing is which one's the attacker, who struck first. I'm just retaliating. Now prove it that I wasn't just retaliating. And we're in a deeper hole.
And the lawyers get richer.
Yes.
That's usually what happens.
Yes.
Well, the ethics behind it, you definitely have to figure out. That'd be a big factor. Because to tag somebody with the honest intention of what you're saying, the established rule set, right? Like a Rogue Nation, what it does, the way we censor what we do on our borders. I think that's all got to be factored into a rule set that applies to something like this if it were to occur. Nature.
Let's take a break here from our sponsor. We'll be right back in a minute.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier on this kind of year in review for 2023 and what's looking forward in 2024. Before the break, we talked mostly about what we saw in the year before and where we were at, some benchmarks, and then started alluding into maybe some possible solutions and even, fighting back. What's that look like? Let's start looking forward now. What do we see? I'll let you go first, Shawn, again, in 2024.
So here's what worries me right now. In all the other things are important, but what we're starting to see is artificial intelligence and the advancement of AI is becoming so significant in its application and in its uses. While there's lots of advantages, we know that bad people do things with great technology as well. So there's implications associated with that. We did the Small Business Small Business Development Center did their annual conference last fall, and we do the consulting aspects with small businesses as part of the conference. And a gentleman walks in and he shows me a video. He goes, "I want to show you a video of my client." And the client is a prominent life coach. And a lot of people follow him on social media, Facebook and some other platforms. And because he's so popular and he's such high demand, he's very influential with the messages that he posts on his social media channel. And so he showed me a video of his client promoting an investment that basically ripped off thousands and thousands of people. These are people that believe in him, believe in who he is, and in his, when he's a life coach, anything that he says, people take they don't take it for granted. They take it as truth. The video was taken from multiple recordings on YouTube. The video was a deep fake. Deep fake is where I think we're going to see a lot of scary things happening. We've seen it on Simon Cowell on Voice or America's Got Talent, I think is the name of that show. A gentleman comes out and he's a previous winner on the show. They bring the technology out and he's singing on stage, but they're displaying a picture of Simon Cowell actually doing the singing. That's a deep fake. We saw Nancy Pelosi, I think last year or the year before, there was a recording of her, what appeared to be her intoxicated, making disparaging comments that made her look really bad. It was a deep fake. It really wasn't her. It wasn't. And so the technology and the advancements of AI and the possibility of deep fakes altering opinion for advanced misinformation campaigns, especially in an election year like now, this is scary terrain, and we don't have any rules. This is going to be one of those things that I think are going to be one of the issues that we really have to address in, some of the solutions. And when we talk about this, Chris, you guys are prominent in blockchain. How do we attest that a recording, a video, a picture is actually, steganography, right? So how do we attest that there's authenticity associated with that recording so that we're not, looking at things that look real, but really are not, they're deep fakes.
Yeah, I think the bigger classification for that in general is disinformation. And the more we see the capability of creating information by artificial intelligence, so generative AI producing information, can produce information a lot faster than people can. So if we look at before 2023, when we had the launch of the first AI engines, how much data that existed in the virtual world was created by humans, was a lot high percentage of it. A couple years from now, when AI can produce information at 10 times, 100 times the rate of people, what percentage of the overall data that exists in the world will be human made is going to change. And all of that becomes that disinformation problem. I sit on the future directions for IEEE, and we look at global directions in technology, and their technology is the greatest kind of minds I've heard in forecasting technology came in from one meeting to the next in a 6-month span and said, our whole game has changed. Everything on our radar right now is AI. And last time we came into the meeting, not anything was. And everything categorized under AI had one nemesis, one big dark cloud on the other end of it that no solution existed for, and that was disinformation. How do we handle the negative kind of byproduct of magnification of information production?
Yeah, it's a good point. In a lot of it's training and awareness, but most of your population isn't tuned in to what misinformation really is and what's credible, what's not credible. If I saw it on Facebook and I saw it on TikTok or Instagram, it must be real. And then the catalyst associated with what's real, and then the exponential sharing of information, if it's really negative, but it's exponential, the power of a network can pass disinformation very quickly. And we've seen what the implications are on that. We know that intelligence agencies and state actors do this. But now we have the ability of regular citizens to be able to do it to a point where lives are ruined, the reputations are diminished in seconds, in days, as opposed to how long does it take. Look at both of us. How long did it take us to reach the level of prominence personally, what we've achieved based on our efforts? It can be all it can all be wiped away overnight. It's that scary.
Yeah. And you know what, the solution to that, or the start of a solution, is the branding of legitimate information, and the ability to authenticate what is legitimate, to have attestation of the pieces that are reputable. And it's a new thought process that people have to start understanding. Not only do I check to see if it's reputable, but how do I start to make stuff new moving forward reputable, and combat this knowing that it's out there, is a new kind of, we'll say, philosophy that people have to start engaging with and being aware of.
Yeah.
On the topic of AI, at least on most fronts, I think everyone is really the as fast as this thing's taken off, no one is in control. There are no real controls to AI. Even with Google, their chief information, their officers, most of their technologists, they've even said that we've now got an AI that literally it's doing its own thing and we don't know what it's doing anymore. So they have lost control of their own AI. Chat GPT is used heavily today, especially in universities, about writing what's authentic, what's not. And even now, Chat GPT is supposed to have regulatory measures so you can't use it to do nefarious acts, but they still can get around that too with the use of it. The alternate to that is AI being used as a defensive measure. But here we go with just the AI against AI. I mean, it's really counteracting. And like you said, Chris, what reality does that project future-wise when the human being can no longer understand what the AI is doing to the other AI back and forth? And where have we gone with this? Basically, is where we go into this whole Skynet, epic thing. So that type of thing is where everybody escalates off to. But that's truly what we're seeing, and it's happening so fast to us. What will happen? I mean, the concept. So, and you're right.
And I think
misinformation is probably the big piece to it.
Yeah, sorry, Tim. I don't want to go too much on it because we're running out of time, and there's a couple other things we want to talk about. But yes,
Sure,
AI is on everybody's mind, and as cyber people, we are definitely looking at not only its usage, but the combating the byproducts around it. But this year we have an election year coming up. Dr. Murray, you want to elaborate on your thoughts about how that plays out?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is a great segue. We're talking about misinformation campaigns. We saw it in the last presidential election here in the United States. The primaries are indicating that America wants change again. We're not sure what that looks like, but you're seeing all the mudslinging. What is it for a legislative environment that we're going to see? Depending on who gets back in office. And so we're seeing feedback coming from various countries. There's so much conflict going on in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe right now that are part of the legislative environment as well. You've got resources going to conflicts that we're not involved in, tactically, but we are involved in strategically because we have allies, we have treaties, we have support agreements. We've got a border issue. We got the state of Texas right now that's fighting with the president on not allowing federal agents to manage the border in their state now. And so I think there's a lot of consternation. There's a lot of things that that we're losing some control on, and it's during an election year. So I think it's a very volatile environment. I was reading a report. We have cities within the United States that we have lost so much control that the police will not provide any order. And I'm not going to name those out, in our production here, but that's very concerning when you start losing control of towns and cities within your own states because of the lawlessness and the unwillingness of government, either at the state or federal level, to make change.
Unwillingness or fear. If it's that lawless, what are they going to do other than make themselves a target?
Yeah. And where does it go? I mean, we're seeing states legalize hard narcotic drugs. It just because we need to change our approach on this. And so, I mean, traditional values, we're seeing hard right. We haven't seen hard right in decades, and hard right advocates are coming back. We're starting to see those as well. And you're going to do what I say because this is what we believe in, and this is why, and this is what you're going to do. And we haven't seen that in many decades, in fact over 100 years. So there's a lot of strife. And I don't know, when we're talking about everything is AI and misinformation, I think it all feeds into it. And at some point, yeah, I think the volcano is going to have to erupt, and it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, Tim, thoughts?
Yeah, that whole fear concept is what plays into most, and the loss of control. As we excel, and it excels past the speed of human thought, which is exactly what seems to be happening almost at the speed of light here. I think humans don't see themselves as a part of it. I believe that's a cultivating idea with some of the stuff that's trending so fast. So that's fear. There's fear to that. You're right, and that creates animosity across the board for all types of subjects, subtitled subjects, things of that nature. It becomes an individual effect in some rights. I'm sure that as individuals, as groups, as committees, globally, nationally, we can all support this idea behind AI, but there's got to be some rule sets, I think, in play. And I don't know if we're trending past our abilities at that point or not. So it's curious to understand what this year will unfold with that concept of AI, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be curious to see where we go with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I heard a lot of fear and uncertainty moving forward. I think we need to go back and take a step back almost to what the Reagan years look like. There's a positive. How can we move forward by taking control? How can we look at what it is that we can empower? And both political parties are not focusing on that. They're not fighting over what can be done. They're fighting over how we're going to handle and address the disarray, the chaos. We need a third viewpoint to step forward and say, here's a philosophy of how we can start to empower. We need to put certain pieces into place. We need to empower the individuals. And this is what our philosophy we kind of been talking about in the digital age, by individualizing controls. And when we roll out those type of things, yes, it's not going to change things that are happening now, but it's going to start from the ground up, building a new approach where people and individuals do have control. But it has to be taken from a political support that, hey, there is a new way to look at things. How can we start to build positive? I've heard my whole life and growing up in an area where there's a lot of gloom and doom, where the world's falling apart. But then there's times when there's great moving forward. And those people that are just managing the chaos are still there when things are moving forward. They're just quiet in the background. How can we make them quiet again? How can we get things together? And I think that philosophy of start to bring our resources together. We have enough people to listen to this show to start to say, hey, help and look into let's moving towards empowerment of individuals. How does that and how can we participate? And that's what I would put out as a call to action in this moving into 2024.
Yeah, and those who want to contribute to that movement, and I'll call it a movement for lack of a better word, it's not about your contribution because you're powerful or influential or want to receive something monetarily. It's because you want to engage and you want to incite change, and it's for the betterment of everyone. And currently, it doesn't matter what your government is, if you're communism, if you're democratic, whatever it may be, somebody is always looking to be influential, somebody in power, and of course, money is influence.
Yeah. Well, I think that breath is a good place to end. Thanks to everybody for joining today's episode, and we look forward to help being that anchor. I think there's an empowerment in the future here. Reach out to us. Let's all try to get involved with this. Thanks, both of you, for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.